Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another week at the 4th Box podcast. We are already halfway through May, which means we are just a couple weeks away of being halfway through 2026 somehow already. I truly can't wrap my head around it. It's been a very weird year. Stays weird, continues to get weirder. So, we're going to kind of jump into some topics tonight that are amongst those weird things that have been going on and just see where the conversation flows. So, welcome back, Pops. Great to be here. What's going on this week?
Well, as you know, the chalkboard is full of items that we could be discussing. And prior to doing that, of course, we want to welcome all of our listeners, those of you that share our podcast with friends and have brought others into watching and listening to the show. We certainly appreciate that. Continue to do so. As always, we are gathered here at our virtual Buckman Tavern, a place that patriots gather, to bring to you the 4th Box podcast, 123rd edition. And as part of that, I'm raising one of my traditional favorites, a Sam Adams. And this is a cold snap. Believe it or not, we're still finding cold snap. So they must have increased the production on that this year. But for the toast, we recently celebrated Mother's Day. And tonight I am raising my glass to all of our mothers who were and are the foundational piece of strong families. And as we've discussed many times, the importance of strong families, if we really hope to turn this country around, it's our belief here at the 4th Box that starts with a strong family. And here's to all the moms out there that have continued on with building and holding together strong families. Crucially important to us fixing our communities, fixing our counties, fixing our state, and hopefully someday the whole country. So big salute to all the mothers.
Cheers.
Then we talked a little bit a week or so ago about trying to find some contemporaries, because I think that was a little more meaningful maybe for the quote. And from time to time we'll find some current wisdom. So tonight, bad schools, crimes, drugs, high taxes, the Social Security mess, racism, the healthcare crisis, unemployment, welfare, state dependency, illegitimacy, the gap between rich and poor. What do these issues have in common? Politicians, the media, and our so-called leaders lie to us about them. They lie about the cause. They lie about the effect. They lie about the solutions. And that come from Larry Elder. He has a lot of good posts out there. This was a quote I thought was really relevant, kind of highlights some of the things that we've talked about in the past, that most of these problems are created by the same people that then come up with the solutions, oddly enough. And we find ourselves trapped in this vicious circle. So that was our quote tonight.
Yeah, great quote. I like that we're pulling some newer names into the quote mix. It's funny you say that. I'm rewatching the Peaky Blinders show right now, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but essentially it's a fictional story about kind of what real life gangs were in the basically like 1910s through 1930s in Britain. And as I'm rewatching it, it's so interesting because they're racketeers, and as the show goes on and as their gang sort of expands and they, take over more territories, become more powerful, they end up embedded with the government, and the leader of the gang ends up a politician, and he's closely tied with Winston Churchill and a lot of decisions that are being made to defend the country and to maybe create rifts between Britain and other countries. Are It's happening with the use of this racketeering gang, behind the surface. The the public isn't aware that they have so much political pull, but as you're watching this show, which is, as I said, fictional, but based on some real events with a few real people mixed in, you you see how it becomes so easy for these two worlds to overlap. And it always has. This is an old story, but kind of set like 100 years ago. But this story of gangbangers being either in politics or running the political world behind the scenes is not new. And I find it really interesting as I'm watching the show again, how much I feel like these gangbangers are exactly the same as the politicians that I watch on TV today. And so when you share a quote like that and you recognize that all the problems that we have are because of our politicians, it becomes clear why. Our politicians are racketeers. That is what they do. They solicit all of us for endless money and offer nothing in return. Safety? Is that what they're selling us? Maybe. But we're not receiving anything. It's just an illusion, and it's just something I wanted to touch on as you were sharing that quote, because I think it's so real and so relevant that that's what's really going on. And that's why we, the little people, can't get out in front of it, because they're the gang. They're the big city gang running the show, and there's not much we can do about it because they're violent, they're cruel, and we're just trying to get by and protect our own families.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've mentioned many times, and quite honestly, have for quite a few years, that the biggest threat to people in this country is our own government. I've called them criminals for a very long time, and anybody that lies to you directly about the job they're going to do, to me, is a criminal if they do anything that except that which what they promised to do. But not only that, when you look at, and I know we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the war tonight or whatever that thing is down there that they're calling the conflict with Iran, but this is basically just another windfall, super huge windfall for the military industrial complex now, as I guess Hegseth's going to oversee the dispersion of $1.7 trillion over the next year or so. And this is just more of that rat race we talked about, where, all this money gets appropriated, the military industrial complex gets enriched, it then gets some kickback to those that helped provide the laws that made this all possible and have kept this war going. And there's a big vicious circle, and they just continue to plunder we the American people. And oddly enough, the thing that's really painful is that there's a large percentage of the people cheering for this continue. We got to get over there, and we got to end this. We got to end Iran. They're 2 weeks away. People just buy into this slop and watch their wealth being stolen away while they're waving the red, white, and blue. It's just very frustrating. But didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on that tonight. But I like your analogy, because truthfully, this is very much like a gang operation, extortion, and we, the little person, as you said, we're carrying a load. We're the ones being extorted every day, either by the lies and subsequently the money that we pour in, or just the outright stealing of our wealth and plowing it into things that never come back to benefit us. You listen to some of the people that are quite worldly, talking about how far China is in advance in terms of their infrastructure compared to us. And we keep running around somehow thinking we're sitting on the high horse, and we're really falling behind. And it's largely because people have been duped and brainwashed into believing the bullshit that we've had crammed down our throats. So We have people in office that have lied to us of every stripe and distinction. Parties mean nothing, folks. They're both sides of the aisle, and then some have stolen from us and enriched themselves and their friends. And until we wake up and decide we're going to change it, it's only going to continue getting.
It is. We're watching it get worse all the time. So before we get too far into, the topics that we have to go through tonight, I wanted to share our moment in history. I know you usually take the helm on that, but I came across a story that I thought was really cool because I'm up here in New Hampshire and this is a New Hampshire story. So, it's kind of a long one. I'll try my best to summarize. I can be long-winded. But this is actually a little bit before the 250-year mark that we've been touching on the past few weeks. We've been trying to keep that, hey, 250 years ago in this month or on this week thing going because, of course, it's our 250th year anniversary as a nation. This is just a little bit before that. This was in 1772, so kind of leading up to that revolutionary era. But basically, in the early days where the colonies were still under British rule, the king reserved the tallest and oldest, most mature white pines in all of New England. And they marked all the trees that were reserved for the king, with like a broad arrow marking on the tree. And they were meant to be used as shipmasts for the Royal British Navy. It was called the Broad Arrow Policy, and it was illegal to cut the trees down. Originally, the policy was covering trees that were 24 inches in diameter when this first got put in place, which I think was like 1690 or something like that. They ended up dropping that down to any tree, any white pine that was 12 inches in diameter or above. So that's a lot of trees. I mean, if you think about the trees that are in your yard, a 12-inch diameter tree is not very big. So this basically put any colonial loggers out of work immediately. And it put a lot of early settlement building at a standstill because now there was essentially no decent timber for the early settlers to use. They only had small trees left to resort to. So the policy was not super strictly enforced. People were aware of it and, you kind of had to adhere, but it wasn't necessarily being super enforced. You could kind of get by until there was a new governor installed in 1722, and he sent the deputy surveyor of New Hampshire out to search all the sawmills in the area for any already felled trees that had that broad arrow mark. He ended up finding 6 mills that were split between 2 different towns, and the mill owners end up hiring a lawyer together. The lawyer just instructs them to pay a settlement. Let's not even go through all the ruckus of the courts. Let's just pay a settlement up front, get out from under it. So the mill owners in the first town went ahead and paid a fine. No problem. They just want to get out from under it. The mill owners in the other town, which was Weir, New Hampshire, said, no, we're not doing that. We refuse to pay. And they send out the sheriff from the county to go and arrest the leader of this group of owners. Sheriff and the deputy arrest the guy. His name was Ebenezer Mudgett. They take him in and end up releasing him with the understanding that he was going to post bail the next morning. What Ebenezer does instead is gathers a group of, they say somewhere between 20 and 30 guys, and they break into the room at the inn that the sheriff is staying in, and they proceed to beat him senseless with pine tree branches. They end up doing this to the deputy as well. And then they send them both packing out of town, running them through a gauntlet of other townspeople who had gathered to basically taunt them on their way out of town. 8 men ended up being charged. They pled guilty, and basically they were fined like a couple of shillings. It's presumed that the jury, because it was a jury of their peers, was like, yeah, this is ridiculous. We don't care that they did this. This is great. And they were probably the people that were, in the gauntlet running these folks out of town. So kind of a cool story. This is basically one of the big moments in the colonies that led up to, hey, we're taking a stand against these guys. They're coming in here and they're taking everything that we have for resources. And then they're trying to tell us that we can just pay them some money and get out from under the problem, which is no different than the stuff that we see here in America today. They take our resources, and then, if we try to do anything to protect ourselves, we end up breaking some law, and then the answer is typically we just write somebody a fat check and the problem goes away. So it's really not that different. So I know that's kind of a longer tale, but I just thought it was a really great story how they refused to back down in that instance when their townspeople really needed help. And the big takeaway there is that so many people from the town gathered together, knowing that if there were a lot of them in mass, there wasn't really much they could do. What was the one sheriff and the one deputy going to do in a group of 30 guys, and then the full town shows up to support their actions? So that's the takeaway. And that's the thing that's why we share these stories, because that's the power we have when we actually join forces and stand united like we're supposed to.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a great story, great find. I don't know much about Weir or the other town that you mentioned or where they're located, but I think the importance of the story that you highlight there is the fact that all the way back, many years before the actual revolution kicked off, there were starting to be pushing back against the crown coming to this country, where all these colonists had come over here and were setting up a new way of life. And here they were still under the iron fist of the crown. And the thing that they needed most, which was the natural resources at their disposal, was being taken away from them by the crown and his henchmen. So you have to envision this sheriff being a king appointed person, probably not elected at all, but probably appointed by the king to make sure that the king's wishes were carried out among the colonies. And you can just sense, as you went through that story, these people who are really living a hard scrabble life, quite honestly, many of them, especially out in the frontier areas. And now they're being told that they can't use the trees to build homes and all the things that they needed to set themselves up for a decent living. So you could see where the anger and the willingness to say at some point we're going to push back, you can kind of feel that as you describe that story. So one of those great hidden gems from the past that really helped depict what the folks were going to lead up to what we're celebrating this year, ultimately the Declaration of Independence and the war that took place during those days to win for us that independence. So that was a great find. Really, I'm really interested in how people were reacting and how, as you pointed out, they bound themselves together to present a resistance. It's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was really cool. If you've ever seen the flag, it's like a symbol of a pine tree, and I think the words are an appeal to heaven. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all. It comes from this event, which is called the Pine Tree Riot. And basically, what they were trying to make the stand of in creating that flag and kind of commemoration of this was that we get our rights from God, not from any man, which is something that we talk about, almost every week on the show, because it's so true, it's so important, and it's what so many of us have forgotten. If people remembered that, we certainly would not be where we are today, being completely ruled and under the boot of men.
Yeah, that's precisely right. And I know last week, as you were introducing the Free State Project, and we talked about, I know I bumped into those folks quite a long time ago, and I think that flag may have been part of their logo or something, that New Hampshire group that was organizing the thing called the Free State Project. I think it was a great idea. There was a lot of great ideas back in those days. The Oath Keepers, the Sons of Liberty, they all used a little bit CSPOA, constitutional sheriffs. They all had a little bit uh, different perspective, but it was really reclaiming those things that yes, our rights are gifts from above, and no man has a right to take and regulate them back to you. I think a lot of those groups were really pushing for the same thing. And it's really too bad that as of yet, we haven't all coalesced around one common theme. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today was it was good to hear from General Mike Flynn today. He had a pretty significant article that appeared on the Liberty Daily, among others, where he is really again still a presence out there. He's still calling for full disclosure on the Epstein thing, and I think he, much like some of the things we say, recognizes how integrally these events are tied to that group. So it was great to hear from him today. See that there was a letter published on some national things from Mike. I really think he has a clear vision on how to help get us through this thing. So I was happy to hear from him today. See a note,
Yeah.
a letter written from him today. But anyway, in
Yeah.
order to try and avoid some of the focus on the war that continues to go on, or whatever that thing is over there, I think we're blindly fumbling our way through this thing without any clear objective, or not having met any of the objectives that were set out to be in focus. So I'm really not sure how this winds down. I'm quite sure he's going to be, it'll be relatively quiet while he's in China, I suspect. After that visit, who knows what's going to happen. So I'm sure we'll have lots to continue to talk about over the next couple of weeks related to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not going anywhere, which I think is why we were going to get into this release of the UFO or UAP files a little bit. I said this to you last night off the show. I just can't bring myself to care about these. I think we need to talk about them because I think our listeners may be interested to some extent. For me, it's really hard to get involved with these because I recognize the timing is no coincidence. They're releasing these files, in the name of transparency. Isn't that ironic? While all this Iran stuff is going on, and that has been a complete and utterly catastrophic crapshoot as far as what information we're receiving as the people from the commander-in-chief of the military, who is at war, whatever they're calling it, we are at war, and the commander-in-chief of that military is telling us completely different, opposing facts every time we hear from him. And not only that, but to your point, the Epstein thing is still going on. So if we're going to talk about transparency, it'd be nice to actually get a little on things that people are actually worrying about right now. And I get that, a few years back when things didn't seem quite this bad, people wanted to know about aliens. That's what you worry about when shit isn't that bad. Well, shit's pretty bad now. So we don't really care about aliens anymore.
Right. I think you pointed out a great observation, and there's many other voices out there with similar, that it's really hard to disguise the fact that these things started rolling out just as things were heating up in the kitchen over the Epstein thing. Now all of a sudden we're going to have another big story, and we're going to alert all the pastors, or many of the pastors around the country, because this is really going to probably cause some of the faithful to be led astray when we start bringing. There's all kind of new drama to catch everybody's eye and lead you off course from what really needs to be uncovered, and that is how, as we mentioned a short time ago, how many criminals are involved with lording it over us. And I think as this stuff ever, if it ever does become fully disclosed, is going to point out that we have a bunch of rotten creeps that have been sitting in high level places and been dictating to us how we have to live our life while they are filled with nothing less than Satan. And I think the obviousness of the timing, such as you point out, the UFO thing, and even the war. Even the war, as I wrote to General Flynn today, it's my estimation that the war is all part of that as well. And how is Israel ties into all of this with the Epstein? Obviously, we know the influence related to the war and their ongoing desires to rule over the other Arab nations in the Middle East. But I think all of these things, again, they just have overlapping circles of activities and people in that inner circle. So until we get this stuff divulged, which was signed into law, the Epstein Transparency Act was signed into law. That means, thankfully, Tom Massey and Nancy Mace, there's a few of them, Ro Khanna and others that have continued to push, but it's pretty much crickets from the bulk of the House and Senate to get this stuff out there. So there's either many of them involved or other people who they feel obligated to protect involved.
Well, that's the thing that's really frustrating about this is that one, the whole UFO thing keeps being talked about as like such a win for transparency. And I just don't, I can't believe that they have the audacity to talk like that to us as if we haven't just seen the files about the Epstein stuff come out. Like, we have not forgotten that. But that's the kind of shit that they love to dangle over us because they know we're not going to do anything. They already tested us. They tested us again and again and again, and they know nothing's going to happen to them. They know they're getting away with this stuff. So now they can just come right out and say, what a blessing it is for us to be your leaders. We are going to be so honest with you. Isn't that wonderful? Sure. And people on both sides of the aisle are applauding Trump. Okay, all of a sudden, the Democrats who have hated him up until this point are like, bravo, what a guy. And the Republicans are doing the same. Okay, that's weird because none of you, again on both sides, Republican or Democrat, wanted any of the Epstein files to come out. So why is it such a win for, the sake of transparency and honesty and truth and knowledge and intellect? Like, how can all of these people on both sides of the aisle be so committed to this weird theatrical act that they're now doing with the UFO thing? I know you've got something to add. So there's another thing I want to talk about on the UFO front before we switch gears. So jump in and then I'll say my thing.
Well, I think both Democrat, Republican, and with the help of the media, recognize how successful, as you point out, they've done this before. They've led the public down these goofy trails that kept them away from what they really should be focused on. And I think now that you have both Republicans and Democrats committed to cheerleading, or many of them cheerleading for the transparency of the UFO files, they know that they are taking the attention off of the things that involve them. Obviously, the FBI has known about these things for many, many years, and both parties have had their crack at running the FBI and could have uncovered all this stuff and presented it to the public. So both parties are involved with covering it up. So I think this is all part, as you described, it's a theater. They know we dangle a big story out there. This is going to catch a lot of attention. It means it shifts away from the things that really might be meaningful, and we start chasing down this other stuff, and everybody's cheering how wonderful this is that this stuff is coming out. It's absolutely meaningless. If we do not fix the criminals that are lording over us and we get caught up in these little sideshows, we are never going to have the freedom that we were intended. This is all part of the big mind trap that they have us in.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that I have to add about this stuff, because like I said, I didn't care and I didn't want to look, but I knew we were going to talk a little bit about it tonight. So I went ahead and I looked on the government site for it, and I couldn't believe how insanely stupid it was. It was the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. The first picture wasn't even real. You could just, as soon as you saw it, you were like, that's like a Photoshop. It's just like a gray, like literal, I could do better on clip art, like with clip art, you know what I mean? It's insane. And so I'm like, that's weird. Well, then you read it, and it literally says, the caption for the photo is, this is so good. Actual site photo. Okay, because the rest of the photo is just a grassy field, which is real. You can just tell it's just a regular photograph of like a grassy area. And then there's just the one like gray circle in the sky. It says actual site photo with FBI lab rendered graphic overlay depicting corroborating eyewitness reports. And then it goes on to explain the dates. So people explained that over in that field, they saw a gray thing. And the FBI, with all of their incredible software and technology, plugs in a gray circle like into the screen.
Yeah.
And they go, here you go, American public. This is the moment you've been waiting for. Like, This is literally the kind of shit that is on this website. I can't even believe. And that's how you're like, okay, this is all a scam. You see something like that, and you know the government is just trying to pull a fast one. But all jokes aside, the other thing about that's frustrating is that these reports, they're not claiming anything any different than anyone's already known. They're not saying aliens are real. They're just saying, hey, here's some photos and here's some evidence. Mind you, these are all just eyewitness reports, most of which you've been able to find on Reddit for 30 years, as long as Reddit's been a website. Like, the people who've seen stuff have already told the rest of the internet that they've seen stuff. They didn't come to the government first. So any of these stories that are true or not true, I am much more apt to believe the random guy in the back corner of the internet over the government now telling me about it. I promise you that. However, all that said, they're strategically releasing groups of these files every 2 weeks. Why? If there's nothing interesting, if these are just clip art edited photos, why? Why do you need to release them every 2 weeks? Because they're being proactive with their distracting. They know that they're going to do more bad shit. So let's get out in front of it and make sure every 2 weeks we have a way to pull people's eyes back off the bad thing and onto this completely edited photo of nothing that means nothing, that it's actually the opposite of transparency because it's not even a real photo. It's labeled a sketch. This is the world that we're living in.
Yeah. Well, you know my feelings, and not that they didn't know it before, because they really did, but to me, the whole COVID thing told them so much. To me, that's what I said, it was a test balloon. They know that they being the government, the CIA, the FBI, all of those that manipulate data and present to us the distractions that they want us to be paying attention to, they have gained such a level of understanding that the American public is so easily duped into anything that comes off the TV set. All they got to do is repeat it a couple of times by those trusted voices, good old 60 Minutes or whatever it is, CNN or Fox News. All you got to do is go there, and you're gonna get the truth, and you're gonna know. So I just think, just like I know one of the other things we're going to talk about, the Hantavirus. I think here's another thing that's going to be heaped onto the pile right now to keep everybody focused away from the Epstein thing. We're going to create a whole lot of stir leading up to the time before the midterm election. It's just the same old crap we always get presented. It's just bullshit that people still get caught up in this nonsense instead of being ready to tar and feather the people that are feeding this crap to us. I was going to talk, I was going to just spend a moment last night when we were talking before we got this program set for tonight. They're talking about the AI and all this, and there's many people out there believing that that's the place to go if you really want to get unadulterated information, unaffected by the biasness of one group or another. And people believe this, and you don't have to look very far to see how the MK Ultra effect. Just think about what they're doing and manipulating with the AI that everybody is just gobbling up by the spoonful and the mouthful, because this is just the greatest. Just think about the distorted information that's being put into that thing to keep us all in a state of a stupor and stupid, and not looking at what the real problem is. And the UFO thing, this new virus that's coming out, and everybody, they're going to be pounding the drums for a new vaccine. This is coming.
Yeah. I mean, a couple different things there, right? Like the AI thing, you kind of hinted at MK Ultra, and the MK Ultra thing is an interesting one that I know we have a guest coming up in a couple weeks who actually was meant to be this week, and we had a little bit of an emergency going on his side. So he's going to join us soon, and we'll get into the MK Ultra conversation a little bit deeper. But the thing that people have to consider with that when we talk about something like AI or, the Hantavirus or the COVID or anything else is that they came out and told us stuff the same way they always do. They always give us a little carrot. They have to. We've talked about this many times. This is part of the deal. They have to give us a little bit of what they're doing so that we, by doing nothing, are effectively consenting to what they are doing. Now they've shared that information, so we know about MK Ultra, but not fully. We have some of the details. They told us that program was decommissioned decades ago. Let's assume that's true. Because, I don't believe it, but let's assume it was. Even if it's not still an active CIA program, they spent a lot of money during that time to learn a lot about the human psyche and how to control it. They have that information. The CIA is powered by that information, baby. They're running on it. And everything that they do from that point on is part of controlling us in mass. That was why experiments like that were run. And think about all the experiments we don't know about. Yep. It happened. They spent that kind of money so that they knew how to manipulate our every turn, which is what we see happening. The other thing, the Hantavirus, I know we want to go into that a little bit. I said this to you already off air, but I need to say it on the show. I can't believe this is real life. It's as stupid as these generated photographs of UFO blobs. This is a virus that you catch from being around mouse shit. And it's always been a thing. It's been around forever and ever. And if you're in some weird, creepy attic that a bunch of mice have been living in, that's the time that you're supposed to wear a mask. I know people have gotten confused over the years with why the masks even exist. Actually, it's for shit like that. Actual mouse shit. This is a real thing. I know this because I've cleaned out dark, creepy spiderweb filled areas of old attics and barns where they say, be careful, there's a lot of mouse in there. And you go, okay, sure. And you don't lick your fingers after you were in there, because that's how you get Hantavirus. You don't get Hantavirus from standing next to a guy on a boat. So this is nuts. The fact that all of a sudden they're using this as the next big thing is so, to me, I think there's a reason for that. I think they could have, just as easily as they came out with COVID-19, created a brand new lab-generated virus. to infect us all. But why do that when at the same time they can once again test our stupidity a different way? Hey, this is a virus that already exists and you can't catch it like this. Let's just pull a little prank just to see if these idiots fall for it. That's what I feel like is actually happening, because this makes no sense if that's not the case.
I agree, and I think over the years I've grown to come to the point where I think some of these things are just done so intentionally ludicrous to see if we will gobble it up, and largely we gobble it up. Caveat to that, I also have heard in the circles that I like to peruse around through now and then that there is speculation that perhaps in the lab they have somehow caused a mutation where this thing now can become airborne and pass person to person instead of just. And I would not be at all surprised by that if they were working on manipulating the virus so that you could take those traits that come with the hantavirus, those illnesses, those symptoms that come with that, and somehow you got it mutated into a virus that can become airborne. And I can't rule that out, but the hantavirus itself, as you described, something that's probably gone back to the bubonic plague or what have you. But I think over the years, many of us who have come to the realization that government is not looking out for our best interest have begun to think about how ludicrous some of these things are that they present to us. And I just think that just gives them a new level of operation when they see they can get away with some insanity by spoon feeding it out through the media. Whether it's the use of MK Ultra techniques or whatever, they spoon feed this out. They sit back and laugh and think, look at what they are gobbling up now. And now they know that they can expand the next step. And that's all. I think that's all part of it. I think we've been so far led astray from our ability as society to critically think. And of course, that's all part of the education system is too. But I think we're so far removed from a large percentage of population being able to critically think. Just look, there's still people running around with masks right now from the last one. Yeah. 6 years ago, 7 years ago, there's still some people running around. Just think about how much they learn that they can manipulate things and just spoon feed it out to us, and everybody's ready to charge off the cliff again, just like a bunch of lemmings. It's I don't know how we're ever going to turn this around until people first learn how to critically think.
Well, that's how you know that people are too comfortable. They will do anything for safety and comfort. They don't question, they don't look into anything. They just go, oh, I will be safe and I will be comfortable if I do whatever that guy said. And that's not something you do if you're not too comfortable. So all these assholes who are complaining about how, everyone's misogynistic and racist and transphobic, you're too comfortable. That's the only reason that you can complain about things like that. And that's why you crave comfort so badly, because comfort is the only thing you have ever known. So then when you have this sense that you're going to lose an ounce of safety because of this made up virus, you'll do anything. You'll do anything and you'll fall at the feet of anyone to get that safety back. It's just so alarming. And I know you mentioned earlier too about, a vaccine coming down the pike. Of course. Moderna's already working on a vaccine for hantavirus. That's why hantavirus is being talked about right now, because you're not ever going to sell a vaccine for hantavirus when most of the people don't spend enough time around mouse shit to need the thing.
Yeah.
Well, really surefire way to, boost your marketing is to create a hantavirus scare. Now you'll sell the thing. And it's the same thing that we talked about a couple weeks ago briefly with Lyme. Pfizer's getting this Lyme vaccine to market no matter what. They're pushing this thing through come hell or high water, which means this year there's ticks everywhere. And you know what? I can already speak to that. I've already seen more ticks this year than I typically would by May, mid-May. It's kind of early. I've already seen more ticks. What a shock. What an absolute surprise that while there's a new vaccine coming out, and I could do a whole episode on what I think about ticks. And I know we've talked about that a little, but between the two, between the Hantavirus and the Lyme, and then the vaccines coming out for them, and the control that comes along with the fear, it's overwhelming. It really is.
Yeah, and I think his practice has really gone a long way back. I think there are stories circulating that would suggest, I think, way back in the 50s, there were certain things being taken out of food or added to food that was really going to assist in the population having high blood pressure. And then lo and behold, the pharmaceutical companies come out with a medicine for high blood pressure, which, by the way, if you take that, it's probably going to kill you quicker than if you didn't. But anyway, they create the problem, then they create the solution, and we all run around like a chicken with our head cut off, following around because they sit in high places, and that's what they've been conditioned to learn how to do. We just do what we're told. And that whole thing coming back to critically thinking, nobody steps back and says, wait a minute, how come 2 or 3 generations ago autism wasn't a thing? And now 1 out of 30, and we just accept it. Do you think maybe it's what we're being put into us? But nobody, or some do, but a small percentage of people ask those questions like, wait a minute, I didn't hear nothing about autistic children when I went to school. How come now a third of the class or a third of the kids in school, or whatever these numbers are autistic or have ADHD, whatever all this stuff is? Well, guess what? We just happen to have what's going to fix you. And we keep playing into this nonsense. It's unbelievable. But along that same line, I did want to comment, throw a kudos out. I think RFK is pushing heavily now on the fertility issue and the drop of fertility, something that you've talked about. I think Kendra talked about when we had her on. I know it's a big thing. Many in your generation are recognizing it. And I don't know how far down the line RFK is going to get with this stuff, but at least at this moment in time, he has caused some attention to be focused on that. And I hope people start to wake up and recognize that there's significant drop-offs. Again, talking about created crises. Here is a crisis where the fertility rates are extremely low. There's all these things happening in terms of reproduction, especially high in this country. And hopefully he's going to be successful in calling some attention to that issue.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I don't know how far it'll go because so many of the things that are causing this problem are not touchable. They're just not. These aren't things that we can talk about, that we can go after legally, that you can't. But that said, going back to what you said earlier, all these people who have been convinced that it doesn't get better than this is the freest, best country on earth. We're a dying society. Our fertility rate is sinking every day. Literally, you can go look up the statistics yourself. We are crashing with how few children we're having in this country. That's the sign of a dying society. Everything else aside, all the other problems aside, we're having less children. And most of the people, it's not a want, it's because they can't.
Yeah.
There's I say there's no bigger problem than that, but then, we go back to the Epstein thing. It's like everything's this big problem and it's all kind of cascading at once, which that's really what this episode is about, between the UFO stuff and the Hantavirus and the Lyme. It's all distractions from the Epstein thing, which is really the underlying issue, I think, to so much of it, because as we've said, everything connects back to it because the people in charge are all involved. But before we get, there's one thing I wanted to close with for the Epstein thing. And before we do that, just while we were talking about some of that health stuff, there was one more thing that I wanted to touch on. If we're going to talk about, rumblings that we may have heard that may or may not be true, and another fun, health conspiracy to throw out there. Something I've been hearing people talk about a lot is the peptides lately. Peptides have really kind of taken the world by storm ever since like the Ozempic GLP-1 got big. And I think it's been a little bit before that too, but it wasn't like a household name until Ozempic came out. But peptides are basically amino acids. They're naturally occurring in the system, and then you can take a peptide in the form of an injection and with whatever you're lacking. Any of these chemicals in your body that you're short on, you can take a peptide and then you stack them to make sure that everything stays balanced. And there's all sorts of ways to go about doing this, working with all sorts of different health professionals. And the people that take peptides are not the left-leaning people. People that take peptides are generally the people who are most worried about their health and fitness, who probably refuse the COVID vaccine. You can probably see where this is going. So the thing that becomes concerning about this is that the people who have been very health and wellness minded for many years have kind of jumped on this trend of peptides, and people are now throwing the idea out there that, hey, wouldn't this be a convenient way to get the people who wouldn't inject something into their body to now inject something into their body without them realizing it? I'm not saying I have any evidence of that at all. I'm saying I've never done peptides and I never will. It's not worth the risk. I'm not injecting anything into my body going forward. Hantavirus, Lyme disease, any peptide, no matter how pretty it looks on the outside, no matter how much it's packaged for the holistic, natural health-minded Maha person, that's a little suspect to me. So it's not necessarily relevant to this conversation because it's not something people are talking about. It's not really being used as a distraction tool. But I think it's worth mentioning because I think it's something people who listen to shows like this maybe haven't quite considered yet. And it should be a real concern.
Bree, a week ago, I think you put the perfect umbrella over this whole thing. Hantavirus, COVID virus, peptides, ADHD, autism rates, lack of fertility. I think you kind of encapsulated that when you suggested last week, I think it was, that, prior to 200 years ago, we didn't have the pharmaceutical companies determining people's health. That was done by other means, and we didn't have any of those things that I just mentioned. So it should be a fairly easy correlation between what we have going on today and what is different than 200 years ago. And what's different is we have the pharmaceutical agenda. And if it's something you're going to put in your body that is not naturally occurring, if you can't eat it as a piece of meat or a piece of fruit that you picked up down at the farmer's market, don't mess with it. Don't use it. Don't believe the crap that you're being bombarded with on that idiot box called a television set or on that idiot box called your phone that we all carry around in our pocket and spend too much time with. Most of this stuff did not exist. Super high rates of autism, super high rates of diabetes, super high rates of poor fertility capabilities within. These things did not exist until big pharma took over the whole healthcare industry, and now we're all largely addicted to it. And I think you encapsulated that so well a week or two ago when you said that. That's a simple way of looking at it. This stuff was not a problem before the pharmaceutical companies got involved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And, we can look at that in every category. Everything that is big corporation now that got its hands into everything is screwed up. So going off that and kind of wrapping it back up with the Epstein thing, this is something that we do bring up as often as we can because it is so critically important to all of these other problems. I mean, it connects to the pharmaceutical thing too. Because all of these big players are so deeply embedded in this circle and circles of evil people doing evil things. That's the truth. And everything that is happening right now, I think, is a component of trying to cover all of that up. But it's always been a thing. This has been going on for centuries, this kind of evil. We're only talking about it now so much because finally a little bit of truth has come out. But it's exactly what I said before. It's just like what I said earlier in the episode. They give us a little bit so that when we do nothing, we've effectively consented. Mm-hmm. That's what we're doing now. This is evil, truly evil. At its absolute root, it has been going on for generations. And now that we know about it, that means we're allowing it to continue. So as all these other things hit your newsfeed, you cannot let yourself be distracted. Today, there were several Epstein survivors that testified in Florida as part of a hearing organized by the House Oversight Committee. Today, it was live, public testimonies, under oath, and that's fantastic. Great. At least it hasn't gone away. How many of you heard about it? I bet not a lot.
Good, yep.
And you know the worst part about this? As I was reading this story about some of the things the survivors were sharing, the worst part, everything that they went through, several of them are now demanding compensation for the release of the files. And look, hey, I don't know what you went through. I can never speak to the kind of life that you have to live having to move forward after going through something like that. Not my place to speak on it. What I will say is that that is not enough. Giving the survivors checks is not enough. We don't need chunks of money to make the problem go away. What we need is 20 to 30 guys with pine tree branches going into the bedrooms of the people responsible and beating them senseless. That's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I've always believed that if money fixes the problem or it gives the appearance of fixing the problem isn't fixed. That was just a way of appeasing the individual, but that doesn't mean the next individual isn't going to have that same thing happen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway.
And thankfully, some of them, or at least one of them, did say, nobody's talking about New Mexico. Everybody's acting like this stuff didn't happen in our own country. Like, you guys really need to be talking about this more. So there are things that have been said in the last several hours, just as of when we're recording this podcast, that I hope get to the ears of the American people. I just don't think they will. So,
and you're right, and I don't think largely the American population has the attention span. They're caught up in the next big story, whether it be the UFOs, the Hantavirus, or something going on in Ukraine or Iran, and that's so far in the rearview mirror for most people. It's hard to bring that back up. You're not going to get any support out of the mainstream media or the places that still a large segment of the population, particularly the older population, go to hear what's going on in the world around them. So. Hopefully the younger people are sharing this information and sharing the things that are going on, because I'm still convinced that, the 45, 50 years and plus are still so enamored with the traditional news outlets or, propaganda outlets that they're not going to hear any stories like that.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I think that's going to be coming down the pike in the next few months and, through the rest of the year. And I don't think it's going to be pretty. So,
I hope it comes out. I hope it, just like Mike said today, and his thing is, this can never go away. It can never be forgotten. It has to stay in the forefront. We have to have people that are committed to keep pushing this story. Keep digging and do not let go. We got to lock onto it and do not let go, because there is way, way too many of the events going on in the world around us are tied to these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amen to that. We might not be the biggest podcast out there, but we certainly are in the camp of those who will not be letting it go. So, yeah, you all have that to look forward to. But until next week, when I'm sure we will bring you more information about all of these subjects, I'll turn it over to you, Pops, to close us out with the Bible verse.
All right, I'm going to just touch on two other subjects that I wanted to mention tonight, and we'll get back to them on another day. But the gerrymandering issue, for those that don't really or may not be familiar with that term, going on in a lot of places around the country, different states, trying to manipulate their votes and who ends up winning elections by manipulating districts. And one of the things that happened on the right side of the aisle is I see a lot of people talking about the constitutionality or the unconstitutionality of gerrymandering. And I've looked and really can't find a whole lot that would be specifically tied to that. Maybe there's some parts of the 14th Amendment and so on. But pay attention to gerrymandering, which is manipulating districts in an effort to try to control elections. That's a big thing coming up as we look toward the midterms. And another thing I thought was kind of interesting news, just wanted to touch on it for a second. Alberta, Canada, the reddest of the provinces in Canada, the significant producer of oil from Canada, the very richest province in Canada. Number 4, if they were a separate entity, they would be number 4 in the world in terms of the oil. They are going to be voting on their own independence from Canada. So there's a lot of discussion about them becoming the 51st state. There's a lot of discussion about them becoming their own entity. Of course, it would have to go through the Canadian Parliament and other things up there. But pay attention to that. Up to our north, significant supplier of oil on the global market. The province of Alberta is voting. They have over 300,000 signatures, which has now required that they bring it to the vote for their own independence. So if nothing else, I think it's a big win for the Western Hemisphere, where we seem to be losing our willingness to fight for independence. And I think Alberta at this point is at least giving hope to the Western Hemisphere that maybe some of us will wake up to.
Yeah, I think that sets a great example for what could happen in this country if we put our minds to it, and should deeply consider.
Amen to that. Yep. Okay, then, for the Bible verse tonight, there are the things you shall do. Speak each man the truth to his neighbor. Give judgment in your gates for truth, justice, and peace. And that comes from Zechariah chapter 8, verse 16.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for that. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in once again to the Fourth Box Podcast. Always happy to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, all those things. Until next week, stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.